regarding any items not listed on the agenda. Is there anyone wishing to address us? Okay, we'll immediately move into regular agenda items. Discussion, initial draft transportation expenditure plan, funding, categories and amounts, and I'm presuming Don Tatson.
Well, thank you, Chair. So before I go into the presentation, let me tell you what we're going to be talking about and what input we would like from the authority this evening on items 1.1 and 1.2. So first, following some suggestions made by staff at the June 19th meeting and concurrence from the authority, we have rearranged the categories in the expenditure plan. We'd like your comments on the new categorization. Hopefully you like it too. The second topic deals with return to source funding. At the June 19th meeting, the authority was still at 19%. Meetings occurred subsequent to that. And so the draft you have in front of you includes, with the exception of West County, an 18% return to source allocation. There is a rule of physics that every action has a reaction. This change certainly proved that rule to be true because those who supported the categories where that extra 3% came from, which include the regional transportation priorities and funds to provide infrastructure support for job growth, were displeased. So we've got two broad options, or maybe three. I mean, one is to ignore their displeasure, but I don't recommend that. The other to include changing some principles and policies so that we could provide funding for those uses from other categories, and also to reinstate the category at some level of funding. We're going to recommend doing both of those. The infrastructure support for job growth category had roughly a 3% of funding. We're recommending to bring it back at 1.5%. And where the money would come from now is to some extent up to the RTPCs, but from staff's point of view, some of the candidate categories where it could come from include the major roads category in each RTPC, seamless connectivity, and reduced emissions. And what we're talking about is about $45 million. So it's not trivial, but it's not a major category. And then we also recommend that you approve the changes in the guiding principles that we're going to recommend this evening. So with that, let me get into the presentation briefly. Sir.
What happened to West County in that?
So West County, as I recall, left their return to source at 15%, but put additional money into transit. Put additional funding into transit.
So the way we had it would stay where it was?
It would stay at 15%, but I think what we'd ask West County to do is, if the authority wants to put money back into infrastructure support for jobs, that they could transfer some of that additional transit money back to that category, for example. In addition, we've received a letter from West County expressing concern about the elimination of the regional transportation priority category. So there are a couple of ways that that could be dealt with, but one of the ways would be that that could be reinstated. Or,
the way we had it?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is that what we're doing?
Well, I think that's what's going to come out of this conversation. A little premature. So, so the input today we've got the input from our June 19th meeting. The ad hoc committee has met once or twice since then, plus we've received some written commentary. We've had a number of meetings with cities and towns and other elected representatives. The RTPCs have been meeting and authority staff has been attending those. You've received letters so far from WCTAC and the County Sustainability Commission, and we received stakeholder input, including a lunchtime conversation today. So the input just keeps on coming, and that's good because we are in listening mode. Just for recollection, at the June 19th special TEP meeting, you left open the exact return to source percentage to another draft of the expenditure plan, given that we hadn't heard from the RTPCs. We still haven't, with the exception of WICTAC. You supported the concept that to have a high level of total funding committed to alternative transportation modes to the personal automobile. So you'll see in the current version, that's now at 53%. You endorsed us going ahead with a strategy for reorganizing the expenditure list to come up with some broad categories and signature projects, which is what you have in front of you. You endorsed a change in the policy to consider funding new regular BART cars in the future should BART develop a train control system that could handle additional frequencies, and we've put language in there to allow that, although it is not required. That would be up for a future authority to do. And you approved 4% for a combination of planning and administration funds, because a number of the RTPCs had been reducing that. So what you see in front of you is the 4%. So in summary, the revenues remain at just over $3 billion. The expenditures by subregion are continue to be based on midpoint population of the essentially at 2035, and so that remains the same. The expenditures by type and mode, the transit and alternative modes to the personal vehicle is now at 53% and 47% for others. So the transit has crept up a bit.
I'm sorry, can you go back to that when you said that last thing? The transit? I'm sorry, the transit, where'd it go?
So the 53% in green,
53%.
right?
Okay, and BART added to that would be 60?
No,
Is that the
BART
way
is
you
part
read
of
it?
that 53. So the breakdown is 35 for local transit, 7% for BART, and 11% for bike and ped.
So we're down to 50, okay.
So that's up a little bit from where it was before. And then just the expenditure plan summary, the way we've done this, there are two broad categories. One is relieving congestion on highways, interchanges, and major roads, which really means the corridors in which those are on, not that all that money goes into highways and roads. So we've got the 242 Highway 4 and E-BART corridor, about a little under $700 million. The 680, 24, and BART corridor, about $500 million. And I-80 and 580, including the Richmond-Sanderfeld Bridge, and the BART corridor, and the West County BART corridor at about $225 million. Then the other broad category, which encompasses more than half the measure, is improving transportation countywide in all communities. So the first one is we've renamed what historically have been called return to source to call modernize local roads and improve access to job centers and housing. So at 15% in West County and 18% elsewhere, that's $532 million. Walking and biking is $215. Transit well, if you take this category of 192 for transit, other than in West County, and another 187 for transit in West County, you're at about 390 total for local bus transit. 154 for transportation for seniors, veterans, and those with disabilities. 120 million for cleaner, safer BART as it's been. 87 million for safe transportation for youth and students, and 43 million for reducing emissions and improving air quality. And that sort of ties into funds that could help implement the program you just heard about. And then the 4% for authority, planning, and administration. Oops, too quick.
Thank you. I have a confusion between what's meant by the transportation for seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities. In some places it says accessible, in other places it says affordable. Like on 1.3.-33,
Okay.
number 23.
We'll look that up and clarify. I can't do it
So
right off the top of my head, but
Okay, but I think it's supposed to be accessible, not affordable.
right.
I-
So let us check.
I think the
Okay.
word has
We'll
gotten
take your comment.
mixed up.
All right. So on the return to source category, just to go back to this, it had been called Fix and Modernize Local Roads. We're proposing changing the name to Modernize Local Roads and Improve Access to Jobs and Housing. And part of that is a desire to change the policy to make job-related funding allowable in more categories. And then the funding amount in West County has stayed the same at 15%. The other RTPCs in this plan is at 18%, although we have only heard from WICTAC, so we may hear different things from other RTPCs as they weigh in the next couple of weeks. And so the new average becomes 17.4% compared with 15.2%. Oh, well, and I think I've gone through where it came from. We removed the regional transportation funding in each subregion, and we removed the funding to facilitate infrastructure, public infrastructure for jobs and housing development. And that's what led to the reaction. The other thing we're recommending is some revisions to the guiding principles. And those are on page 12. Actually, on page 13 of the revised, or the current July 11th Transportation Expenditure Plan. And these are guiding principles that the authority adopted in the spring. We'd like to make two changes. One is we'd like to add another guiding principle that we would call economic opportunity, although that could be changed. And the concept would be to say that adding jobs closer to home can reduce commute times, greenhouse gases, and vehicle miles traveled. And therefore, it ought to be one of the principles that the authority uses when they're making allocations for funding. And then the other change that we'd like to suggest is that the first principle is called defined benefits. And given some of the input we've received, coupled with the results from the market research that indicated that people wanted to hold us accountable for performance, is to change the name of that category to performance-oriented. Performance orientation.
New one?
So you just strike defined benefits, replace performance orientation. And when you get to the detail in the staff report for section 2.1.2, there's some suggested wording. Okay. And so we're happy to turn it back to you for conversations and direction and questions.
All right. Comments, questions, but I do have some speaker cards also. So when do we want
wait.
to, we want to wait till after we get done here and then we'll go to public comments.
I go to them now.
You want them now?
Yeah, so we can
Okay,
hear
we'll
that.
do the speaker cards first. Okay. Dave Campbell. Followed by Juan.
Dave Campbell, Advocacy Director with Bike East Bay. I want to start off by thanking staff and this commission and even the RTPCs for their solid commitment to bike ped funding. I won't try to convince you that I'm not happy with that. So thank you for that. I am concerned with the low funding levels for transit operations outside of West County. And I know the plan has, it almost seems like $2 for every $1 for transit capital improvements versus transit operations, whatever transit operations are going to look like, shuttles, vans, buses, whatever that is. Once somebody leaves their car at home or their neighbor leaves their car at home and they walk, they bike, or some sort of shared modern transportation gets them to some vehicle, what is that vehicle and who is paying to operate it? Where is that in here? And I think that's where we're still not there yet. At least I'm not seeing it, and because I'm not seeing it, I'm not understanding the story that we're going to be telling the voters. Yes, enough people will be leaving their cars at home and doing these other things to get from their home to what? This mainline better transit service on these corridors. Yes, we have $2 for every one for transit capital improvements on those corridors, but who's paying to run the vehicles? What is that story? I thought we might hear some of that tonight, but I guess we'll hear it maybe at a future meeting. But I would encourage you to continue to ask those questions. What is the story to the voters about that percentage of people who do leave their cars at home because of what we're funding in this package? What are they eventually getting on to, BART or something along 680, 24, I don't see that. And if you see it, great. I'll look forward to your conversations about that tonight. But what is the story? And why is that so important? I want to win this thing. I don't want to try this for a third time. You've heard this. It's a broken record. And we need everyone on board to tell this story and to win this thing. And I know a lot of the groups I work with, they're like, where is this story? Where is this transit story? As that term encompasses numerous modes. And if we're not on board, if the only people on board are the cities and this commission, we've got a problem. So in that sense, Bike East Bay is not on board yet because I've got plenty to do. In 2020, there's lots of elections out there, and this is one of them. And I want to prioritize this, but I want to make sure everyone's on board, not just every city, but all of our stakeholders. And so I'm really anxious and interested to hear the story. How is everyone on board? How is that going to get us 2/3 of the vote? Is the funding for transit operations versus roads versus freeways? What is the right mix that's going to get us that vote? What is the story that's going to get us that vote, and how's it going to get us that vote? I'm all ears tonight. I want to hear this because I want to get this right now. Thank you.
Good timing.
Followed by Haley, Greenbelt.
Good evening, Juan Pablo Galvan with Save Mount Diablo. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment tonight. Actually, I have a clarifying question. I do have some comments on the funding levels, which is this particular discussion item, but also some on the overall draft TEP. Is it best to say what I say now or wait later? Or now? So you guys want now? All right. I'll stop wasting my time then. So, like our partners in the coalition, about a dozen organizations that are working on this right now, and as Dave Campbell from Bike East Bay stated just now, we're also quite a bit concerned about the unexpectedly low, I guess you could call it, funding levels for transit that we see in this draft TEP today. But also concerned and kind of greatly concerned about some of the other larger issues that we've seen in this draft TEP that we've been saying since failed Measure X in 2015 and 2016. Among those things, it's not just enough to fund transit at what looks like to be a large value. It's to provide a viable and hopefully preferable alternative to the automobile, get people out of their cars effectively. And overall, one of the larger concepts, not so much a component of this TEP, but what should be upfront, the main focus, front and center, how to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gases. That's the main challenge, I guess, of our time at all levels of government everywhere on the planet. Another large-scale item that continues to bother us, lack of valid, enforceable, implementable performance criteria with teeth. How do you get good projects the top-level funding that they require and ensure, 100% ensure, that bad projects are not funded by this TEP at all, not 1 cent. So we're part of a coalition of about a dozen organizations right now, and we remain quite concerned about this current TEP, and the talk from, I don't want to speak for anyone, but quite a few of them share our concerns. Thank you.
Greenbelt, Haley, followed by Chris, Transform.
Good evening. My name is Haley Currier, and I'm the East Bay Regional Representative with Greenbelt Alliance. I'm echoing some of the sentiments of my colleagues Juan Pablo and Dave Campbell. I was pretty disappointed to review the last transportation expenditure plan. I'm not sure how this draft proposal is moving the county toward a new model of transportation that's treating climate change with the urgency that it demands. As my partners in the coalition have been saying since the last measure, we need to see a strong commitment to reducing VMTs, greenhouse gases, and a guarantee that this regressive tax will not be used to fund growth-inducing or car-centric projects. In general, the process has been devoid of the public engagement that is required for a truly community-centric plan, and our requests for strong criteria that ensure climate change and equity goals are met are lacking. The timeline of this project has led to rushed conclusions and insufficient progress for Measure X. So we'd like to see, as we've said, a meaningful investment in public transportation, as other counties around the Bay Area have been leading in. A commitment that no VMT increasing projects will be funded with this tax measure, and clear performance-oriented principles, goals, and criteria for evaluating project performance to determine which projects will be funded, and a prioritization of equity and the needs of disadvantaged communities, and assurances that projects will ensure the needs of seniors, those with disabilities, and low-income communities are met. While we're pleased to see some important progress in this tab, I'm not ready to recommend an endorsement until assurances are made that this measure will treat climate change with the urgency it demands and prioritize the needs of all of our community members. Thank you.
And that was our last speaker card.
Yes, good evening. Chris Lepe with Transform, and also a member of the aforementioned coalition. I want to start off with thanking staff for being so inclusive in the conversations thus far, including, as mentioned, a lunchtime conversation today. In terms of I think on the question of transit, I think the operative word there was mentioned is creeping, and we're not looking for creeping, we're looking for leaping compared to where we need to be. And so, 12% for transit operations just doesn't seem like a transformative number for us, right? If you think about the growing needs of the elderly population and what those needs are going to represent in terms of the paratransit costs for the county over 30 years, what does that really get us? What does 12% really get us? And it's not clear from this proposal what it does get us. What is a transit service frequency and breadth of transit service that we're going to see as a result of this? The other thing that's been mentioned is a performance orientation, and to the greatest degree possible, the more concrete that we can get, the more specific that we can get about what this is actually going to achieve for Contra Costa voters is absolutely critical. I can't explain or sort of relate that enough to you. Over in San Mateo County, where they just passed a sales tax, which was performance-oriented, is performance-oriented. They had 11 different principles that laid the foundation for how the agency was going to spend the money. What's interesting is that now after the measure has passed, staff have all of a sudden said, well, maybe we won't use all of those principles. Maybe we should just use 6 of them or 8 of them or 4 of them for each of the spending categories. So what we need to see, what I think we want to see, is as much specificity and concreteness in how these dollars are going to be used, for sure, moving forward into the future. The last piece is the equity component. Equity is talked about within this plan as being spread around like peanut butter to all of the different regions of the county. But there is nothing that says that we need to be investing to where the need is at, where the greatest barriers are at within the community. So we look forward to working with staff and with you as a board to continue to hone in on the language a little bit more and hopefully advance this proposal forward together. But I will say, as the sentiment that you just heard from others, that at least among the community-based organizations and regional organizations that are part of our coalition, there is a steep hill to climb within a very short period of time, unfortunately. So we got a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, that was my last speaker. All right, now we move into the part of comments, questions. Yes, sir.
I'll start off. Let me thank staff, because I think that you've done an outstanding job of identifying jobs within the language here. In many cases, I look at where we're at is once again a business as usual approach, which the voters did not approve going forward. I think that with the language, it helps me somewhat. But I would like to introduce another category, and that category would be relieve and reduce commute projects. So, in essence, in our former measures, we have had in there the focused growth category, which was 3%. I'm saying that this category would be 1.5%, and that we would be able to focus on job centers and to allow that we reduce the commute of people or totally relieve the commute of people so that they can live, work up in the communities where they're coming from. The northern waterfront is an important part, but it's not the only part. I'm looking at this as a county-wide function. The language is good, but unless you have dollars to point to, it becomes very ambiguous and very unstructured on how you get that type of relief that we're looking for. So I would suggest another category, and again, we've had this in there in the past with the focused growth piece at 3%, and I'm suggesting 1.5 cents. And I would hope that my colleagues could understand that and understand the impact that it would have in giving some relief to the other roads that are out there that people are heavily using and bring jobs to where the people are.
Comments?
Well, I first want to start off with the last comment is they want to find out what this has to do with transit, or if we're not paying attention to transit. Don and I sit on the same board. We meet tomorrow at 9 o'clock on Arnold. 3 of the members of staff are out here tonight if you want to talk to them of how important they think just where we are now is to our organizations. When I first saw that focused growth had been lined out, well, I don't want to repeat some of the things I was repeating before we got here. Let me just read a couple things, and maybe you can see how important I believe this is to San Ramon. I just underlined the initial TEP that we received. How many iterations you've done of this thing. Focus growth, support economic development, and create jobs in Contra Costa. It's 1.3-37 now. It was 34 when you originally, we have so many different copies. I don't know if you're going to find it the same thing. But to me, this is what you've got. This was maybe the most important thing in here because we're looking for leveraging funds in the future. And it reads, in conjunction with its existing transportation for livable communities. In other words, you got a good project, you've got 2 different funds. Transportation programs and projects will promote housing within planned or established centers that are supported by transit. I mean, I read that and it just screamed Bishop Ranch. Funding will also incentivize employers to create local jobs and promote transit, shared trips, telecommuting, and shifting work schedules, all with the intent of reducing commuter traffic at peak commute times. And this is what we're trying to do. Now, I understand if Transpac wants to do it and somehow move it around that we might be able to do this, but there's so little money that was in the southwest area, and I know we could use every dime of this to try and do what we're planning on doing in the city. And then when I looked at some of the other things that were going, that I don't want to reduce or lose seamless connected transportation options and reduced emissions. That's what we just heard from people. And I read one line in particular that it talks about at the bottom, that's the page before if you're looking, where it talks about on-demand transportation service. I mean, this is the direction we're going. MOS, mobility on demand. Why are we giving this away? Now, I understand you got to trade something for something, guys, but you got to put it back on the table that if you're going to go to 18%, we're going to go up from 30 years.
No.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Dawn and Tim and Lindsay for all the hard work and the subcommittee that's been working on this. This is a different plan. And the reason it's different is when you look at the analysis of why it didn't pass last time, and it had to do with regional. And it's kind of like we're all dressed differently. We all have different personalities. Our subregions are very different. And we found that in looking at those, each one has a different problem. There's a different solution. And if we believe that we're all the wisest people in the world and we're going to tell everybody what to do, and by the way, vote what I tell you, that doesn't work. And we know that. People make their own decisions and they take about 15 seconds. So the average voter takes 15 seconds to make a decision on this, less time than they do to figure out what suit they're going to buy. And we found that those regions have really different problems and different solutions. And there isn't one solution or one concept that's going to solve all of those. And part of that is because of the densities are different. The access is different. We have very urbanized in West County, which kind of reflects what they're asking for. Their proposal for their plan for their voters is a little different than the rest. And I really applaud that. I think they have looked well and they've come up with a good plan. We've also spent a tremendous amount of money improving access to transit, adding transit that we haven't done in the other parts of the county. For example, West County, we have spent more money, $1.3 billion, more than any place else, of extraordinary amounts of money with great benefits of EBART, a huge improvement on freeway access and those things. And this plan has a different solution there than it does for the San Ramon Valley, different solution than what we see in West County. And I think we have to be honest, as much as, if I were just the planner hat that I usually wear, I'd want one plan and I'm going to do this and I'm going to make everybody, we're not going to be able to do that. If that's what we think we're going to do, I would suggest make a motion, cancel the meeting and all the other meetings, because we're done. We're wasting taxpayers' dollars if we think we're going to get to one plan. I like the changes that were suggested, and truthfully, other than those two categories, but part of that money was moved up. When you look at improve or modernize local roads, improve access to jobs and housing, that's a big deal. That's a great category to move that money up into there, change our policies. And by the way this is written, we're changing Measure J. This isn't for Measure XYZ or whatever. It changes everything we're doing. That's what it says. That's kind of what Measure X did. So we have to be a little cautious and also be transparent to the people who are going to vote for this. We have wonderful ideas, but the fact is this is really the same plan that we had here 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. The numbers have moved just a tiny bit. There's more for bike and ped than I thought we would ever do. And I'll be honest, last night, I've never heard this, I've heard people whisper it, we had in a public meeting, people show up and said it's about time we should no longer put in bike pathways unless we tax the bicyclists. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, look, we, the people who, if you're driving a car, you're expected to pay for everything. There's a little bit of that sharing through half-cent sales tax. But all of our infrastructure is paid by others. And I thought that was a crazy idea. But the fact is a lot of people want something out of this that aren't willing to pay for it. And we want to use our philosophy and that we're smarter than everybody else. And I think people look to us to be futuristic, but we also have to be realistic. And that the realistic part of this is understanding we had some great principles last time. I think these are better. The principles that are here and the one Dawn just suggested, these are huge, huge changes that we're proposing and how we're looking at it. we are a transportation agency. And whether or not all of the subregions are going to invest more in public transit than others, that's a reality. We do now, and in the future it will be. If we could put an E-BART somehow through the San Juan Valley, that would be awesome. BART will not let us do that. They did their own study without talking to anybody in the San Juan Valley and came to the conclusion they will never, ever put any assets in the San Juan Valley, period. And they voted on that. That's a hard one. Are we going to be able to do other things? Yes. We haven't done the improvements in that area of the county that we have in other areas, so there's still some good low-hanging fruit that will create safe pathways, give us opportunities to do some new inventive ways, which are transit and non-transit, and that's important. We need to try what those are. I'm not sure how we get another 1.5%, what you're suggesting, Federal.
There's a large pie out there, so you start slimming in some areas and you can get there real quick.
Sure. We also have to be careful. We're going to have 12 groups here who say, if you change anything and don't give me what I'm out. The reality is, it's really up to our voters. And the analysis we did, we went a different approach in how we looked at that. My biggest concern from the voters in my area is additional train cars. Now, for E-BART, absolutely. But it's not in our area. And that's another. And remember, you have one area that donates the largest amount of tax. The largest amount of tax, 2.5, 3 times what the rest of the county does per capita. And we're asking them to some do, but actually percentage-wise it's really small, that it is actually something we have to account for. So all I'm saying is I think we're headed in the right way. It's a huge movement of the changes on what you call return to source, adding the jobs housing. But these policies, I hope we read them carefully. There are some things that I have heard other agencies that are concerned about them. They're changing the direction how we're headed. This is getting us on a different course. I think I'm willing to head that way, but I'm a little concerned about them, and I think they're great concepts, somewhat futuristic thinking, but we also have to be cautious about that we are affecting Measure J, and that we need to balance that a little bit. So I like where this is right now, and if we want to tweak those policies, I think that's a really great discussion. If we continue to move these in major ways on there, we're going to lose a section, and it's not going to happen. And we have East County cities now, 2 major East County cities. We've got 3 in sort of central 4. It was hard to get them to agree to this, really hard. And so from their perspective, they moved a lot away. I think we can get them to agree to this. So just more food for thought. We've got a lot of moving balls, but which one of those is going to get us across the finish line? Otherwise, we can have great philosophical discussions. I love that. I'd rather do it at my house in the backyard by the pool. I'll supply all the wine and beverages. And we can talk for hours into the night how we're going to change the world. And that's a good discussion, but we're also at a point where I think we have to make some decisions and make the best decisions we can. It won't satisfy everybody, but we have to get it to a point where people will accept what we're doing and give us the opportunity. And we've left a tremendous amount of flexibility for the future to change this. Because, by the way, it says in here that all of these will be changed and revisited over a period of time. This isn't going to be stuck. And I don't mean in the opposite way of what San Mateo was doing. This means the future will change, and we sure as hell better have a plan instead of building more roads. If we come up with an alternative or a technology is out there that we can use, we should have the flexibility. And that's an important message to our voter. That's what's built into this.
Monica.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. This is going to be short, and I just want to respond to the question about transit. I do assure you the transit operators or agencies have been meeting to discuss the TEP, and At this point, each agency talked about what they're contributing and what's working in their parts of the county and what doesn't work. But that group really feels that, they're willing to make a compromise to make sure this measure passes. So I just wanted to put that in there that, yes, the transit operator agencies are meeting and have put their input into it and are still listening, but wanted to make sure that people did know about that.
Kevin?
I understand Federal's concerned about not having a specific pot of money devoted towards creating jobs or helping jobs in Contra Costa. We have to work at stop being a feeder county and stop telling everybody to go west, young man, because that's where it's at. We need them heading east. And in Central, to really, the only way we're really going to address the congestion issue is moving jobs or creating jobs that are more local for people out here. I understand that concern. Let's go back to your policy page where we had changed the policies. Right there where you said stakeholder input, improve access. We're going to add an economic opportunity policy principle to this page that has the page we're talking about right here.
Yes. And what we're proposing it say is CCTA recognizes that adding jobs closer to residents' homes can reduce commute times, greenhouse gas emissions, and vehicle miles traveled. CCTA will consider making sales tax revenue available in many expenditure categories to partially fund transportation infrastructure that is likely to result in significant job growth. And then we had an example there of the Northern Waterfront, but it wasn't meant to be limited to that. We had an example at the end of the sentence referencing the Northern Waterfront, but was phrased in such a way that it was not limited to that.
But like I say, so by giving up a specific amount here now, tell us how this is going to the proof is how are we going to get access to those dollars without having a specific line item in there? How can we use this to spread it out through all the other categories and make it available for individuals, RTPCs, or this organization to determine where and how that money is going to get spent?
So one of the ways you can do it is in the performance evaluations. You could set up a criteria that talks about whether this helps facilitate job growth. Having said all that, I think our recommendation as staff was to reinstate a 1.5% category, and let us give you some suggestions as to where those funds could come from. I think it makes it easier. Right, and then would also be backed up by these policies. But if you just want to do the policies, there are ways to try and do that. There's less surety.
So you're suggesting staff would be open to creating a 1.5%?
Yes, yeah, that was my recommendation when I was presenting. I think you were out of the room and Federal was out of the room.
Okay.
Yeah, my recommendation was to create having listened to the reaction, was to go back and create a 1.5% category, and we'll show you where we would take it from, and you can all decide whether you like that or not.
Done.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to mention that I happen to be a member of the League of Women Voters, and there is actually no such thing in Contra Costa County called the League of Women Voters. There are two League of Women Voters, and they don't always see eye to eye. So the way it's worded, that there would be a representative from the League of Women Voters, is perhaps it needs a little finesse or something in there, because otherwise it's problematic. There may be other groups in here that are like that, but that one in particular I happen to be familiar with. But moving on, I think in kind of to carry on what was just said previously, that what really is important is that each area of the county get the fair share of the dollars. I think it goes back to that. So if everybody is an equal 1/4, let's say, I know that's not quite true, but for the moment pretend like it is, then if I want to put my 1/4 in 3 buckets, and you want to put yours in 2 of those buckets plus a fourth bucket, that's okay. I think we just need to say that that's okay, because if we each get what we want, who's to say that that's not right? I would say, for example, in my area, Once Transit, my city has no room for jobs. We have no land for it, So I don't mind having jobs in Richmond right next door, and I bet Richmond doesn't mind that either. So we get along, right? That's okay. So I think we just need to be flexible in that kind of a way. And I would suggest that we, leave it to the dollars being distributed, as we've already said. And then we can, in general, we might have we have a lot of common ground. We all need roads. We all need some buses. We all need this. We all need that. And then maybe I only want one thing and Newell wants another thing, and that's okay too. So I think if we do it that way, then when the voters look at it in West County, they'll say, I see West County in that. Yet on the other hand, SWAT, when they, if they're from SWAT, there needs to be something in there that they like. And I think that's how we have a winning measure. But to say that, for example, my little city of El Cerrito has to have a lot of jobs when we have no place to put them is not a reasonable thing to do. But we can make it work out in our region because we've got Richmond next door and, in fact, on the other side of the street. So anyway, that's kind of all I wanted to say right now.
Okay, Julie.
Yeah, I'm really torn on this because, we tried to make a change that would put jobs front and center for access to jobs, front and center for the entire county. And by eliminating that, what was then a 3% category, we actually made all of the money available for access to jobs. Every dime in this plan gives us access to jobs. Further, in the introduction on page 16, we started talking about with the whole $1.41 billion that we're talking about for infrastructure, we talked about relieving congestions on highways, roads, interchanges, all of that, and access to jobs is right there in that page. We went further onto the corridor that has the most money in it, which is the SR 242 Highway 4 and EBART corridor, to mention specifically Northern Waterfront twice as promoting access to jobs. Now, I had a thought that we could add an extra bullet, perhaps to that first column on the left, where it talks about improving access to jobs along Highway 4 and SR 242, and maybe it goes back into the overarching before we even get to the specific corridors, but to add a statement perhaps that says that we want to promote job development that encourages the use of the reverse commute capacity countywide as part of our strategies. But I guess I'm concerned. I mean, I can see the point you're making about wanting to be able to have a line item and point to it. I'm concerned if you go to 1.5%, that's $45 million, and that's peanuts. If you can point to the entire plan and say, I have $1.4 billion that's helping to provide access to jobs countywide, it seems to me you've got a stronger statement. And I understand, and we're mentioning Northern Waterfront here. I know that's a particular interest to you, federal, but I'm having a real hard time saying that we should create a new category that emphasizes jobs that is so small when it really ought to be the whole plan. And maybe we need to put some other policy statements in there about using the reverse capacity and that kind of thing to encourage support of jobs and access to jobs. But I'm really struggling with this one, so I'm not convinced yet.
And let me just say, I'm not being parochial on this issue. I've been working on the Northern Waterfront, and that's why I could point to it. But I'm talking about a county-wide jobs piece with a reverse commute, reduce commute. I'm talking about communities that are getting on the road every day. 8 out of the 10 people that are leaving their homes are going somewhere else. And we need to have job centers where people can go to work. We need to do more in terms of trying to convince our public that we're doing things in the right way. This measure has a lot of legs and arms to it. And unless people find that they could hold on to something, then they're not going to want to be a part of a measure. And I cannot go out and sell a measure that does not have the linkage that's there. So although the principles and the language is there, there's nothing substantial to point to when it comes to the dollars. It's in the language, and it's like a good piece of meat that's smothered by gravy. Are you going to get to it? Maybe not. And so let me just say that once again, it's not about being parochial, and it's more than one way to get things done. And this piece has been eliminated through all of our measures. We've not looked at reverse commutes. We've not looked at job centers in areas where people are leaving each and every day. And it becomes very frustrating. And it's time for us to look at how we do transit, how we do the reverse commute, how we allow people to live up and to work in the communities where they live. I'm not talking about a lot of money, but hopefully this will serve as an example going forward for the things that we need to be concentrating on. Yes, it's peanuts, but it's a starting place to really get an opportunity to analyze what our future could look like when we do things differently. The same cookie-cutter approach has not worked for us. And if we're not willing to try new things or give people some hope in different arenas, then we probably are faced with the same thing that we've always got, the same type of results.
Hudson.
Yeah, I was going to ask the question with the 1.5% back then, but Julie answered it at 40 or 45 million. I think she is pretty much spot on with the direction she's going federal. You and I are in the same boat. I'm trying to do the same thing, and I've got communities that are servicing the business park in my city that have 90% outflows. Every day people are leaving La Miranda to come to San Ramon or Dublin or over to Walnut Creek, et cetera. And I understand the reverse commute, but it's more than that. Some of us are charged with the responsibility in our priority development areas of adding thousands of homes to be part of that solution. And that's what I looked at here, is we might have been taking that away. And I assumed that was part of what you were talking about in Pittsburgh also, if you can do it. As long as, and I think that's what I heard with Don, is you could use this to leverage and get funds from different pots, because the big pot we're going after is going to be next year. I mean, any of this money we're talking about is just going to be a drop in the bucket to whatever they're going to try and do with CASA if it comes down to it, and others. And we have to go after those pots as well. So to me, where I think you're headed is really kind of where I'd like to see it headed, but I don't know if we have to do it with 1.5 that says Waterfront and 1.5 that says Bishop Ranch, as long as you think you can make the connection, and I think you can.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it's either or. I'm saying that it's countywide, and those eligible sites would, we could put a process in place that makes it competitive, and the sites that where you're able to make a difference with job creation, reverse commute, those are the ones that compete for the dollars. Yes, they're peanuts today, but hopefully, it'll be a lesson for us in how we move forward.
Kevin?
No, as I look at this the compromise is obviously to do both. It is to leave the language where it's out, so the whole measure is open for job creation, and that we specify the 1.5% or 45 million, whatever dollar amount that is. The dollars aren't what's significant. It's the mention in the TEP that this exists, that this is an important issue that the county needs to address, is job creation. And I think we also need to go back and look at the Byron Airport in that area and insert some job creation in that description also. Because a lot of what we're doing out there is so that we can attract jobs out to the airport. And not only just commute, improve commutes in and out of the southeastern part of the county, but we want some job creation out there so that we can work in that reverse commute part of the process and do this stuff. So I think as we look at this, there is no right or wrong answer. I think the appropriate thing is looking at a compromise. Look and see what you can do with a 1.5%, where we can pull that from. You're right, it's peanuts, but the fact that it's listed, I think, is what's important. And so that we can go out to the voters and say, this is, we understand the importance of this issue countywide. Maybe not El Cerrito. But the rest of us are dying for jobs. And looking to reduce the congestion and the confusion and the commutes for everyone. And so I think the compromise is to include both.
Tom, you're
Yeah, I'll address a couple of things. This 1.5% thing, I think we all totally agree that the subject and the objectives are important. And, if it takes a 1.5% carve out to make people happy, let's just do it. But the flip side of that is that, frankly, I think it's more important to embed language in here that makes it clear that's one of the guiding principles of projects using this money. I didn't do the math, but Julie said it was what, 40 million? 45 million. So if you take 45 million and divide it up 4 ways, each region of the county is going to get $10 million, 13 million. I mean, you can't even build a building for $13 million, and I don't think $13 million in any part of the county is going to solve the jobs. It's going to develop jobs. If it's used as seed money, it could, and that's one of the items that came up at WCTAC, and it's in the WCTAC letter. Is we wanted to be sure that, and it was part of that same issue, that before there was some pot of money there that was perceived as being there as seed money to attract grants for certain things. And what we felt that as long as it's clear in the language that that's an opportunity with a lot of these pots of money, that solves our problem. We just wanted to be sure the opportunity was there. And so, I'd invite you to take a look at the WCTAC letter. I think it's all resolvable with language. It's none of it has anything to do with moving money around. The other thing I'd like to address is go back to most of the speakers. Most of the speakers were representing these organizations that wrote this June 19th letter. And I don't know, it's Urban Habitat, Transform, Climate Lobby, Bike East Bay, and so on and so forth. I got to tell you, if I were the transportation czar, I would do everything they ask for and more. I'd just do it. I would want this to be transformational. Because that's what I believe in, and I think that's what we have to do. But the flip side of that is I keep telling people, look what happened with Measure X. Part of something is better than all of nothing. And I think that at some point we got to come together on this. You know, and I looked at their suggested percentages versus the ones that are shown on page 5 of the latest draft plan. So you see the pie chart there. So they ask for 64% transit, and if you add up local transit and BART, you get 42%. So that's how far we are off there. If you look at local street and road maintenance, they ask for 15%. We're showing 25. If you look for bicycle pedestrian, we're right the same. We're both at 11. And highway improvements, they're at 10%. We're at 22%. So, you know, at first glance, it looks like we're way off. But if you go back and look at the detail, and I just picked one because it's one of these regions that I think had trouble supporting Measure X. So we're looking at the 680-24 BART corridor, and you look at these things that start out looking like highway projects, but they have things in here about implement and improve interchanges and local access so buses can access the highways more efficiently. So that's a roadway project, but it enhances transit. Provide dedicated part-time transit lanes along I-680. Well, that's a road project, but it enhances transit. And if you go through all these, you know, it's very complex. It's really hard to take this thing and put it in boxes and say, this is transit, this is PED, this is whatever. It's, you know, it all kind of works together. And I would hope that we can come together on this, that we don't get down to the end of this and find ourselves at odds with the environmental bicycle lobby out there, because it's just very complicated, and you know, it might even be worth somebody taking the trouble to go through the letter and respond to it point by point, how a lot of these categories that look like something else really address issues that are important to the environmental lobby, to the bicycle lobby, and so on and so forth. I don't know whether we're going to get there or not, but if we don't, we're going to be in big trouble.
No.
I agree with Tom. Is
that it?
No, a couple of points. Got to have an explanation. I agree with him on several points because there are only real 3 pages in this incredible document that's taken a lot of effort by a lot of people to produce. And it's 3 pages which kind of takes the 4 regions and consolidates what's being done, because that's, by the way, is for the voters. It's not written for environmental. It's not written for anything except to get the voters to say, I like this, I'm going to vote for it because I see what's going to help my life and my world. It's not written to address what Tom is just saying, and I think, Tom, you're right, that when you look at all the projects, a lot of them look like transportation or road projects. They're not. They're to facilitate public transportation access. But back to federal, I actually, and I think Tom said this, I don't think we should carve out money for this. And here's a really good example of why not. Our Complete Streets projects, our policy, It's what's transformed the county in terms of putting bike, ped, and cars and designing environments that they all coexist, whether it be at a Caltrans project that didn't care about transportation other than cars, didn't care about people, didn't care about any of those. And we've transformed the county and our community looks vastly different than it did 30 years ago because of the complete streets. It's that policy that every single project we do has to meet all those standards. And that's why I'm saying don't underestimate the new policies. And I agree with Federal about, yes, this is a policy statement, not a line item. If you put a line item, it's one more reason for somebody not to vote for it because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit or support the overall goals of an environment of transportation, living and working. It just puts money there. So, and in our complete streets, it's a policy that has achieved it. We have our other policy, which is transformative, that needs to be tweaked. And it says you build the house, you got to have transportation and infrastructure support. We were the first to do that, to take that development standard. We should take that same standard in a policy and relate it to jobs. You can't keep building houses without putting jobs in. We need to have that into our policy. And if you do that, that's the transformative thing. And then every single dollar that's spent has to accomplish what I think Federal's suggesting. And I think it's a good idea. I just think it should be an integral to the system. I wouldn't identify it because, first of all, you're limiting it for the future. It may become more important as time goes on. So while we can do that, I just think we are at risk of other people saying, I'm not interested. It's one more thing that bothers people that has nothing to do with our transportation agency. Now, we can talk about it and say, well, it does, but on that 15-second look, it doesn't. And I think we should be cautious about that. But I think the policies will get us there, and we have great evidence that our policies have been transformative and they worked.
Karen.
Thank you. A question to staff. With your recommendation to do the carve-out of the 1.5%, and you'll go back and look at places to take it out, does that take away from what Julie was saying, that instead of the 1.41 billion, that now we will only have 45 for the job component? And okay, right now, as Julie explains it, which I was on that committee and I agree with, you got the whole 1.41 billion to do jobs, housing, whatever you want to call it, because I have more comments on jobs, but that's my understanding. But with talks with all the participants, you've come back and said our recommendation is to let's do that 1.5% cutout, and we'll come back to this body and tell you where we took the money from elsewhere, correct? That's the concept?
Right, and do the policies, but also with input from the RTPCs.
I get that, but the bottom line is we would then see a document with the specificity and that 1.5% cutout of 45, give or take, million. My question is, we now have 1.41 billion. If you do the carve out and do 45, while that 1.41 is reduced by that, can that money still be used in addition to this 1.5% cutout?
Karen, it wouldn't be a separate carve out. It would just be delineating a piece of the 1.4 billion specifically for that category.
That's my point.
But it's part of the whole. The rest of it's still eligible.
Okay, that's where I wanted to go. Now, I agree with the policies, and we need to put that in there. But having served on the ad hoc committee, if we want to get this passed, and I think I've been very clear that I still have grave doubts by the public, we felt that we needed to be, I'm trying not to make a play on words, but transformational in how we presented it to the voters. And that's why we went with this corridor messaging as opposed to how it has been in the past. And one of the two major points, government does not create jobs. Let's all be real clear about that. We put policies in place that attract jobs and that's why I think it's important for those policies. But as long as I've been a member of the Board of Supervisors, and before that in other elected and staff positions, we have been trying to get jobs out here, and they haven't been coming. So I think it's important to put the policies in place that may make it more attractive. You're talking about the airport. Who knows? But if we have these policies attached to the dollars that say any project you're going to do has to have this component, maybe this time that's the secret sauce that gets us there. And I just lost my other point about jobs. But, most people who are voting on this, and no, I do not mean to be disrespectful, because I understand it's a regressive tax because we all are paying it, and those who have lower economic status are still paying the same amount. But the people who are trying to get to yes already have jobs. That's why they're commuting where they're going. And I support putting the special language in there on the policies and highlighting all of this for jobs. But when I talk to constituents, their number one issue is my commute is too long. How are you going to help me get to my job? So we know as government policymakers we need to have jobs closer to our housing. But the person on the freeway already has a job, and that is just not at the top of their list of this, other than maybe the company I work for, if you could get them to come out here, but that goes back to the concept of the policies. Thank you.
Okay, okay.
One last comment.
One last comment.
Let me just say that I deal with a constituency that is talking about jobs where they are. And until we start to embrace what other people are talking about, then we're going to be failed whether a measure passes or lose. We still fail in the overall sense of things.
Okay, Don, we've kind of gone around the table. So, okay, you're getting ready to say something.
Well, I was going to say, I don't think we have clear direction yet.
I guarantee you, but only. That is undoubtedly true. I guess we need for you
I think there's concurrence that we want to change the policies. I haven't heard anyone speak against that. Well, add a policy as we suggested and then reference it in some in appropriate expenditure categories. I would say in response to Commissioner Mitchoff that I think we view that there's a lot of the entire $3 billion that could be related to these new policies, not just the 1.41. There's potentially a lot of money there.
But my suggestion, or what I really thought you came out initially with a very good suggestion, go back there and find the 1.5%. I mean, that.
I don't think there's consensus. That's the problem.
I know that. I'm just trying to say that was your feeling originally. After you've heard everyone chat here, I'm not quite sure where you think you should go next.
Well, I think at this point we had given a recommendation and we were sort of looking for direction. One of the things you could direct us to do would be to come back with the policies clearly and then give you an option to show how we could create a 1.5% category. And you could decide to accept it or tweak it or ignore it.
Oh, I've got to ask a question. Based on what Julie just said, you're just making it a line item, and we're not taking money away from anything else.
No, we would. No, we'd still have to balance to the $3 billion total. So you would see us remove.
The total is the same.
Right.
Okay.
So you'd see us remove some money from other categories.
That was what my original question was. That it is taking away, even though they could still do it. Okay.
Right.
So
Jan?
It would seem to me that the answer to that is that we have to go back to the RTPCs.
Right. We'd have to go back to the RTPCs.
And see if they're willing to move money around or if they're not. And then maybe some want to do it even more or some want to do it less or whatever. And they need to say where they want it to come from within their RTPC, I would think. Otherwise, we're we might have a bunch of happy.
Right. We could give
unhappy
suggestions,
folks.
but that's it. It's the RTPC who'd have to come back to us.
I do have a motion coming.
I would move the initial recommendation that came from staff.
And just to clarify my understanding, that was that we changed
The
the guiding principles.
policy change, as well as going back and carving out the 1.5.
I'd second it with one clarification, Federal. Can we stop calling it 1 point, call it 40 or 45 million and make it clear?
That's fine, whatever hits that mark.
I do have a first and now I have a second.
Wait,
And-
wait.
I'm getting ready to start calling on people because
Oh.
I do have a first and I do have a second. We're going into discussion.
Because
Wow.
everybody else has their line.
No,
I am going to amend the motion because I believe that we have an agreement about the change of policy, and it is, the second part is whether we allocate funds, and I believe, as I'm reading the commission, that's where we have our disagreement. Is that a fair read, and will the original maker of the motion be open to the amendment?
Or just two, you want two motions?
I would, okay, I have two suggestions. We either divide it into two motions, or I do a substitute motion. I believe that we would get some consensus for sure.
You got a train wreck coming, and I'll tell you. Get it?
So where are we at? Are we,
It's up to federal to accept the amendment.
oh, it's up.
What was the suggested amendment?
Well,
He said he would.
I probably used the wrong term, but my suggestion was essentially we divide it into two separate motions. One, that we include the concept of the policy in our principles in verbiage. And the second one would be whether we allocate a piece of money or a portion of the proceeds for it. Does anybody know what is the right way?
I think you substitute a motion and just say the first motion is the policy issue. As a former parliamentarian.
I'll let you do it because you're thinking.
Okay,
I propose a substitute motion that the first motion is that we put jobs encouragement policy in our principles.
have a first and a second, and then we move in discussion before I call for the vote. Tom?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment. You know, I mean, if it comes down to it in the spirit of collegiality, I would support Federal's request. But if it were my constituent, I mean, I'm not sure where your district starts down in Crockett, doesn't it? And how far down does it go?
District starts in
Pinole,
goes to
right?
Pinole.
Pinole. So the northern waterfront. So there's two pots of money that include the northern waterfront. One is one of them has $226 million in it, and the other one that starts up at Benicia and Bridgenell has $493 million. So we're talking about almost $750 million. If somebody asks me, how is this going to help create jobs in Pittsburgh and solve the jobs housing balance, I would say we have $750 million. Let me point out to you that this policy right here that says that it's a priority to use this money to solve the jobs housing balance and create jobs where we have a job desert, and that all these projects, that a significant determinant of projects should include how they're going to reach that goal. To me, that's more compelling than saying there's $45 million out there and we're going to get 10 of them and that's going to create jobs, in the northern waterfront. I mean, it's just not, it's a drop in the bucket. It's insignificant.
I could appreciate everyone's comments on this. The bottom line is that there's no guarantees that you could point to anything. I think having something to point to gives people hope and the ability to look at job centers that are possibilities, incentivizing opportunities for development and job creation. And, let me just say that this is going to be a real battlefield. And I will tell you that this is important enough to me that, whatever the decision of this body is what it is. But
I wouldn't go there. I know what you're going to say. We're all going to do that.
so anyway, the motion.
Okay, Amy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Forgive me, I had to step out for a second, but I wanted to come back and, it was very interesting to hear the public comment with regards to this plan. And, having done a couple of these, I'm mindful of the fact, first of all, from an environmental standpoint, our county is the only county in probably the state of California, self-help county, that has a substantive growth management program that our local return to source is tied to that. And I think that we're looking to strengthen those environmental protections, but I really think that we have done a tremendous amount. We face tremendous challenges in our county. But the other thing is that we have commuters that our folks are driving the longest, except for Solano, of any commuter in the Bay Area. And because of the appalling jobs housing imbalance, the geographic imbalance, our people are driving long distances, and many of them are going to jobs where at this point there is no regional transit that works for them. Whether they're in the building trades going from Antioch to building the new city of South San Francisco, or they're driving. So I guess, but in listening to the public comment, I think it might be helpful for us to take another look at the transit investment in terms of, number one, looking at how it relates to the congested corridors, and that's both capital and operations, and looking at seeing if we have sufficient transit investment in this plan to reach consensus. And I know, having done this before, we really need to have everybody's support in order to pass this measure. And I think that the progress that we've made in terms of the criteria is really incredible. And I think this is something we can look and bring to our voters and say, your money is going to be well spent. And that's what the polling said. So I don't know where this commission is, but it might be helpful to take a look again at the transit, how we have it described, and also, is it sufficient, or is there more desire for increasing that particular investment?
Okay, okay, Kevin.
We're almost battling over how this will be presented as a campaign. Now, and like I say, I understand federal's reluctance. I mean, maybe campaign's the wrong word, but how do we get the word out about what it is we're doing, and how we initiate it, and how we share with our constituents where our priorities are in here? Like I say, I understand federal's concern about not having any dollars specifically set aside so that we can discuss with our constituents that we are concerned about job creation out here. Now, and you can see both sides on here. How are we going to explain it to our constituents in such a way? None of them probably are going to get this, correct? That's not our intent, is not to have mass mailings to everybody in Contra Costa and give them a 45-page document. So whether we include a specific line item in there, or we just tell them in our policies, this is the process that we're going to do. Every project that we have policies in there that job creation will be considered as a funding mechanism, part of the funding mechanism for approval of this particular project.
Commissioner, so that you bring up a great point, and one of the things that Jason touched on earlier about the federal program is when you federalize a project, you've got to go through a number of steps that the federal government requires based on their criteria. So this notion of a bad project, when you state fund a project, you add federal money, you federalize the project. What you're doing is as you add requirements to the project delivery project process, when you CCTA a project, you're going to have to identify and study whatever the principles and components are because they've used CCTA or measure money. So it'll be a measurized or whatever the term's going to be in the future. And so, well, we're very proud of our push to reduce the amount of regulatory requirements. As I listen, we're adding more requirements to an already difficult process to get a project through the project study report phase. We're being asked now to look at VMT reduction because of SB 743. So as you look out in the future, projects are going to require more study, more thoughtfulness about the type of projects based on the requirements if you CCTA a project. And that not only goes for me, because we work on only projects on the freeway, and I would challenge anyone, what is a bad project we worked on over the last 10 years that I've been here? We've got the fourth bore, extension of BART. We've got new BART stations all sprinkled in there. We've got interchange improvements to make speeds faster so we clean the air. That's because those connection on 164, widen State Route 4, we're done with that. That did allowed for a reverse commute back into East County. But as you look into the future, all these requirements that you add, every single project that is CCTA funded, we're going to have to go to the book, whatever it is, and we're going to say, okay, these are the 27 things that we're going to add to the process on criteria for selecting project. Does it meet VMT reduction? Does it clean the air? Does it create jobs? Is there a reverse commute aspect? All those things go into the process in the future. And so what I see is a process that looks almost like the federal program. And I think that was mentioned where after San Mateo passed their measure, they're looking at the 8 criteria and they're going, oh my God, this added a lot to the project delivery process, which is already expensive just to get the project to construction. And then in construction, you've got to pay and make sure there's the adequate workforce. So I think if you want certain criteria, you're going in the right direction because you'll require that when the funds are added to a project delivery project. But keep in mind, you're going to add more to the upfront cost of delivering a project, developing the project, which means there's less money for capital and more requirements to leverage future funds in the future. So I listened to the dialogue. I think you're going in the right direction because I'm not going to be here in 10 years, and so somebody else is going to have to go through this process. But you are. I think this is why the federal program is so onerous, because people come in and say, you need to add more DBE. Okay. You need to add more small business. You need to add more of this. You need to add more of that. And so when you come up with these criteria, that's going to be in the book that we use to select projects as staff. And then hopefully that's what you're going to use to say, yes, we agree, move forward, because every phase is approved by you or your replacements in the future. So you're getting to where you want to go. Just be careful that when you get there, we can still go through the process to deliver projects in the future for.
You can still get something accomplished.
Yes.
Janet.
I guess what I'm having a hard time with is that if, assuming that we approve this, and our RTPC has had no involvement in the decision or how we allocated our money, that we're basically going to be a loser, because what in my area at least, West County, what's going to happen as in this specific example is that people are going to get on the freeway and drive to those jobs. And what we're trying to do is to get people out of their cars. And, we're trying to do TOD, we're trying to do all these different things. And this is not that, and we haven't had a say. And I find that frustrating, really kind of beyond belief, because it's really kind of saying we have no value.
Well, don't go off the deep end yet. We're hanging
Well,
there.
but no, but it is, I mean, it really truly is.
It's,
It is going back to the RTPCs. You already asked that question. This
Well,
is just giving staff direction,
Okay.
and then it'll go out to the RTPCs.
yeah, we're still working on it. We'll
Well-
try to clean you up.
If the, I mean, it's not feeling like that.
Okay, all right.
Uh,
Hudson?
You good? With all due respect to the second of the motion that I just made, I am actually going to support the substitute motion. I believe that the two projects that we're discussing with Federal and I will rise to the top anyway because they have the merit. Oddly enough, when I talk to business owners or the transportation department of Bishop Ranch, I talked to one today before I came out here, and their employees are Pittsburgh and Antioch. And now we're talking about building thousands more homes within walking distance of the jobs that they're working at. One will be wiped out because he's going to put housing in there, but they are very close proximity and have transit. And it's one of the reasons why we need to support the one-to-one jobs housing balance and the philosophy of looking at the corridors. In the corridor where Newell and I, and actually even into Dublin, we're one-to-one with the jobs housing balance. And we've got to keep that. That's what's important, because people are going to eventually move to be closer to work. My neighbor just proved it.
Tom?
Well, I'm going to tell you the West County version of this. You know, we're all looking for more jobs, and we look for more jobs in West County. But when I go to the biggest cluster of businesses in West County are in the food business, food manufacturing, and they typically use, you know, they don't pay well. They have to pay our $15 minimum wage, but they depend on a workforce, a lot of whom do not have automobiles. And when I do these business roundtables quarterly, and I ask people, you know, business community, what do you need? What do you need? They said, we need to be able to get those people to work. They don't have cars. I mean, the jobs are there. We're not looking, but the people can't get to work because we don't have transit service where they live, or we don't have it often enough. And so, I mean, that's every part of the county's got a different version of this, but that's what we need is public transportation, and of course that's what we asked for, and that's what we want, and that enables our people in West County to get to work, and it also probably offers the opportunity to create even more jobs and get more people to work. But it's different everywhere. So what we have, you know, in this order, fits our needs.
I think you got to bring me back to course here. So, with your withdrawing, did that relieve her? But
We have a substitute.
oh, okay. So we're back to your original motion.
It's just a vote on the policy.
So we're going to vote on the policy.
What's on that page right there, guiding principles.
No, all right.
Or adding those.
Okay, as long as everybody knows what we're getting ready to vote on. Milo, you okay? You know what we're voting on? Okay. All right, here we go. Call for the vote.
Those two words?
It's the second large bullet.
Where we're adding an additional guiding principle, economic opportunity, adding jobs closer. That's where we're voting to add. Yes, we want that.
All right.
Principle added.
All right.
The other.
We got to call for the vote sooner or later. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Whew. Unanimously. My. Now we go to the second part?
No, I think unless someone makes a new motion. The
Right, that's what
substitute
I'm saying.
motion-
There was talk of another motion.
Well, I already have a second motion on there. I think she said.
No.
Okay.
I just didn't know the right.
All right,
Bifurcated it.
All right. Didn't you have a
Yes,
motion?
I'm going to make the motion to also go back and to, the second part of the recommendation was to go back and to find the 1.5% for job creation.
Does that mean
The county. Yes.
For example, your
recommendations to get it back to the staff to make the recommendation.
But it would be for the entire county.
For the entire county.
My question was, let's say that WIPTAC doesn't want wants it to be zero.
That's fine.
And then would that mean that East County, assuming the same size, could say 3%?
No.
If it didn't come back unanimous, it wouldn't make it. I mean, if we couldn't find some place to come up with $45 million.
So federal's saying 1.5%, right?
Well, 45 million, whatever the magic number is.
Saying a number, okay. And what I'm asking is,
So staff is going to go back and they. Oh, okay. So,
1.5% of gross.
let's say the dollars is $30,000, I'll make that up. But let's say West County doesn't want to do anything at all. So that means that, let's say East County, who wants to do it a lot, this is a pretend example, that you could have 30% in East County.
No, basically,
So
their
that-
advisory back to this body, we would vote for it again. If WIPTEC was against it and everybody else was for it, and we voted at a majority, then it would be in the TEP for countywide.
And then we lose our transit.
no.
$10.7 million.
No.
Because-
The carve out, they will identify where the carve out would come from.
And that will go to the RTBC, and you get to weigh in on that.
In theory, though, it's proportionate. It's exactly 1.5%.
That isn't how we've been doing it.
Just a second, just a minute. 1.5% of the money. 1.5% of the money that's allocated for your region would equal $10.7 million. That's 1.5%.
I don't know what you said. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
You wanted to know how much money it would be if you didn't want to do it. It's $10.7 million out of West County.
Okay,
That's
so
what
that's
1.5%
it's saying
represents.
so I thought we were going to have a say in our own destiny. So this is saying we already don't have a say in our own destiny, right?
Here's not saying that at all. Janet? I'm sorry. It wouldn't be saying that at all. It would be saying that there would be somewhere just less than $11 million for West County to provide access to jobs. Access, not jobs. Access to jobs. We can't put money into creating jobs. We can put money into providing transportation access to jobs in whatever way West County thinks better. And if that's individual shuttles from certain neighborhoods to certain job centers, that's what it could be.
Projects and programs.
Okay. Do you need a second so we can keep talking about this?
Second. I had my light on a minute ago, but.
We have a second. All right.
So what I'm hearing is that if in West County we wanted to use our 10.7 for transit, it might come out of our transit pot, but it might still be used for transit. So that's why, again, I think this is unnecessary, but I'm not bothered by it. I think for us it'll work out.
All right. I have a first and I have a second. Let's call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, wait a minute. We need to know. We need a roll call vote. All right, who wants to, Terry Ann?
Commissioner Abelson? Commissioner Hudson? Commissioner Mitchoff? Commissioner Romick?
Aye.
Commissioner Butt?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Yes.
Commissioner Arnrich?
No.
Commissioner Hoskew?
No.
Commissioner Geringer?
Aye.
Vice Chair Pierce?
No.
Chair Taylor?
Yes.
That passes with a majority vote of 7 yeses and 4 noes.
Okay, to staff.
Thank you. And I will just say, there are times like the last hour where it's a lot easier sitting on this side of the dais than that side, having sat on both.
All right.
Before we go on to the next item, I would just like
Can I clarify something for our next meeting? You're going to come back with where that money is going to come from?
a suggestion. It still has to go to the RTPC.
Because I'm concerned about which ox is getting gored.
Right. That's why I have this. Okay. I did just want to make a few observations regarding the public comments you heard earlier tonight. There are a number of comments regarding we weren't putting enough money into transit, and I wanted to talk about a few different things.
Okay, question for you, Don. Are you on 1.2 now?
I'm actually looking. I'm actually looking at the summary expenditure plan you have in front of you.
Okay.
And I just want, so as you go out and talk to people in your communities, just understand what's in this version, recognizing this may well change. So, yes, in the actual transit operations, we have 12.4% county overall for the county. But one of the things we recognize in order for this measure to be successful is that it has to provide people with appropriate incentives to get out of their personal vehicles and into transit. And if we put more buses on roads that aren't moving, and if people see more buses going at the same slow speed they're going at, there's less incentive for them to get out of their vehicles and get into transit. So what we're trying to do with things like bus on shoulders and the transit first policy is for people to see more buses going faster than they are. Because some of them will then say, what happens to those people on the bus if they get to go faster? Maybe I should be riding that bus. And our belief is that that's more likely to create mode shift than just putting more money into operations. So that's why we've got a number of projects, as Commissioner Butt had mentioned, up in the capital category. So, for example, to build bus on shoulder lanes. We can't just start driving the bus on the shoulder tomorrow if we had state approval. We've got to do some work on those things. The Transit First policy, which talks about bus preemption and maybe special bus lanes on, at least at major signals, that's going to require some capital money to make those happen in the jurisdictions that are willing to do that. So that increases it. But also, if you just look at this in that last improving transportation countywide in all of our communities, you've got 12.4% for transit operations. You've got another 5% for the transportation for seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities. You've got 2.8% for safe transportation for youth and students, and much of that will be provided through public transit networks. And you've got just under 4% for BART. So remember that the total funding, as we showed you in the expenditure plan summary, is that all of the money that goes to local transit is 35% plus another 7% for BART plus 11% for bike and ped. So it does get to 53%. There's another thing that is peculiar about Contra Costa compared to some of the other counties we've been compared with, is that our residents, in addition to paying this $3 billion sales tax, are paying 1/3 of the BART $3 billion Measure RR. All of that is transit. So if you were to add that billion to the roughly 1.6 billion that they would pay in this measure, you get 2.6 billion out of $4 billion raised from this county, or around 65%. And I guess an open question to the authority I would ask is, in the next version of the draft, you want us to make some reference to Measure RR, that is another thing paid. It's not covered by this measure, but it does represent a commitment or an obligation of the voters of this county to transit. We can include it, we cannot include it.
I would say no, there's no reason to remind them of how many taxes
Okay.
they're already paying.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, but may I just make a comment?
Yes.
You know,
Amy.
I think, Don, what you've illustrated is extremely important. And I think that what might be helpful is to articulate exactly what you're talking about when we're talking with the various stakeholder groups that are coming before us. Because I think what you've pointed out, we are very different from San Francisco or Alameda County or San Mateo County in terms of the capital constraints relative to corridors, and our residents' desire to be able to get out of their cars. You know, frankly, taking transit to work is a luxury, and many of our, corridors aren't suited to that. So I think it would be really helpful to articulate that clearly, and then we can have conversations with the members of the public who came tonight to speak about the issues so that there can be a real clear understanding of how both our capital as well as our operations investments are achieving the goals they're looking for. In addition to the RR, I think it's also important to talk about the RM3 investment that our residents are paying. And I think that it's important to just give that picture. It may not necessarily appear on, this kind of document, but for purposes of those conversations, I think it would be very helpful to add that. So I think your comments are really, helpful, and I think our goal is to pull together a plan that everybody can support. So thank you.
Thank you. And then at the beginning of the 1.1 and 1.2 discussion, we asked whether you were comfortable with the general structure we've used here for the categories in the expenditure plan. Since it wasn't talked about, I'll assume silence implies consent.
I think you assumed right.
Right. Yeah, but not much. Right. All right. So that brings us to 1.3.
No, 1.2, am I correct?
No, we did that.
So 1.2 is done. Great.
Yes. That was the policy.
All right, 1.3. I'm having a tough time with this meeting.
All right. So these are things that are all in the initial draft expenditure plan that you've received. I'm going to go through them very quickly, and we can follow up individually with questions or any conversation you wish to have here.
I'm confused. We just did a whole thing on what we wanted to add to the policies. So wouldn't we already, I get that you need a vote, but do we really need to have a conversation about what those policies are since we've just been practically talking about them for the last hour?
So
There's new other ones?
So what we talked about primarily was the guiding principle. So these are now the whole second half of the document that talks about the Groban, these policies. But I will be quick.
It's going to be quick, right, Don?
Right, I'm going to be quick. These are the ones that are listed in the document. The growth management plan, we're now asking each jurisdiction to adopt a complete streets policy and a Vision Zero policy that would be consistent with the authorities plan. The urban limit line compliance, the only change is that we recognize that the county urban limit line expires in 2026, and we've put in language that says what do jurisdictions do when the county, in the small probability that the county goes out for a new urban limit line and it fails for some reason. So we're trying not to leave jurisdictions in the lurch. Complete streets policy, there's some minor clarifications that it has to be consistent with the applicable California Act and with the authority's complete street policy, which is included. The AMP, it's clarification that all projects included in the TEP are eligible to be included in the AMP. No other change there. Taxpayer safeguards and accountability, we've expanded this for the fiscal audits and performance audits to include all project and program categories, whereas only some had been included before. And in terms of maintenance of effort, there's a provision whereby jurisdictions can be relieved of their maintenance of effort requirements for, among other things, having a PCI over 70. And this would amend that to say that they can be relieved if, in addition to having a PCI over 70, that they have also implemented their applicable synchronized signals plan, complete streets, Vision Zero, and Transit First policies.
Yes.
I thought we were going to change the term Vision Zero. Nobody knows what that is.
We will. Thank you.
Thank you. So that we'll see that in the next.
Right. You'll see that in the next one.
Very good.
In the performance-based project review, we've reduced the threshold for initiating that to 10 million versus 25 million. We're going to talk about additional performance review criteria for 4 specific categories. They're listed there. Just to note that for the major roads improvement program, the funding is allocated in that case by subregion, and the competition is within a subregion, but the winning project has to also meet the performance standards. Otherwise, we ask that it be tweaked or replaced. In the other 3 categories, the competitions are county-wide, except that, and they also have to meet the performance standards, with the exception that we would ask the authority to pay attention to geographic spread of the funds, but not necessarily in every round of funding. And that's just the way it's worded now. So you can change that or,
Yeah.
you know.
Could I just ask a question, John?
yes.
Where did it come from to go from 25 to 10 million? Because we have consulting contracts at over $10 million.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
We have, where did it come from to go from 25 million down to 10? Who's requesting that? Because we have consultant contracts that are $10 million and above.
So these
That's
would,
a really small increment, sort of where our executive director was. Be careful what we're asking for. Are we putting so
Right.
many layers on here? We're going to spend more time looking at things. A $10 million job, and we're paying a consultant $1 million to look at a $10 million job.
so, so the 10 million, I mean, there's no specific request, but what there has been request is that we become more performance oriented as a part of the program. So,
But that's our policies. Just to be honest, I mean, think about the scale, how much money we're spending, because that takes resources to do that.
Right.
And talking about making a small project top-heavy with reviews, that's just a really small amount of money to.
so I think we'd have to look and see how many projects fall in the 10 to 25 million range. So maybe we could do that and get you some.
It's a $3
data.
billion program. $25 million is a reasonable way to do it. And in the world we live in, as Tom mentioned, $10 million isn't even a little building these days. That'd be like, that's just. And again, it's going to cost you about 10% of the value of a job like that. With everybody in, the time here, we're going to be reviewing those. I just don't think that's practical in the scale of things. So.
Okay, well, good feedback. We'll do some investigation.
Everything else, I mean, the criteria and all that's great.
Right.
I don't have any problem with that. Just the scale
Okay,
of it, that's all.
yeah. So we'll come back and see how big a deal that might be. The local contracting and good jobs, my understanding is the people who are trying to work that language out for us are very close, but they didn't get it to us this evening. So by the next meeting. For the affordable or accessible transportation for seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities, we just want to make it clear that no one receives funds before they adopt the Affordable Transportation Service Strategic Plan, which is under development. The Safe Transportation for Youth and Children does not affect allocation of funds from Measure J. Well, that's why I said that. I just didn't write it that way. We'll check and make sure we have it right. Cleaner, Safer BART. We want to, the authority gave us direction to put in language that says they could use, we could allocate money for new BART cars in the event BART completes the train control system. funds either have to be available or can be reprogrammed consistent with other policies. There's no obligation to do this. This is an opportunity should it arise. And then this one, the County Major Roads Improvement Program, I talked about this in the performance standards. We've put in language that says that if it was clear that we have excess funds because we've done a wonderful job of getting low-cost bids or we've been able to match beyond our wildest expectations, that the excess funds are allocated first to TEP projects and programs that are not fully funded and then can be allocated to new things that are of best overall benefit to the county or residents of the county. And then because we've got enough new guidelines for some of these, we've now put in a new policy about developing the guidelines. It's a little scary. And basically what it says is it's going to be a public process. We'll come up with a master schedule by the end of next year. The measure passes. There'd be a semi-structured scoping process involving public input. There'd be drafts that would come to the authority, would get circulated to the Public Oversight Committee, the RTPCs. They come back and be adopted, and they're to be concise, written in plain language, and trying not to duplicate other requirements. So if you find something that jurisdictions already have to do that's close, you just go with that, so you don't create something new. And we didn't change the transit policy, and we have to rename the Vision Zero policy, and I already talked about the other points. So happy to take any comments. And again, if you want to send comments in after reading these, they are lengthy and they occupy the back half of your handout.
Okay, and I do have a speaker card on this item. Bruce, fast.
My middle name is Fast. Thank you, Mayor Bob. Last Wednesday, the Delta Peddlers Board had a vigorous discussion about this measure. The main concern was with policy considerations around complete streets and Vision Zero. These statements are fine, they are well appreciated, but moving down the chain of command, how will these policies influence what ends up on the ground? Lip service is good, but we want accountability. We want to be assured that the local elected officials will buy in on complete streets and that they will direct their staffs to make the lane stripes well considered when they get put down on the new pavement. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other speakers? That was the only speaker card I had. All right, any questions, comments with Don? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
First, second. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Those policies. It's on our agenda.
Okay. Opposed? Unanimous. Correspondence communications?
Chair, we still have 1.4. I'll make it really quick, I promise.
I'm trying. Go.
So Don already mentioned this, but we are in listening mode. We are looking for everyone's input and comments, and this is everyone's opportunity to continue shaping this plan. And so, over the next several weeks, we will be continuing to receive input from all. And Lindsay and her team are continuing the public outreach activities and scheduling the telephone town halls, community outreach events, and Don and I have been continually seeking additional input from the RTPCs, which are actually meeting again next week, and the Public Managers Association and special interest groups. So we've already started getting a number of requests to attend city council meetings to do presentations about the TEP, and we will continue to receive all this input and look for ways to update the document. The ad hoc committee could, based on chair's direction, to meet as necessary to address some of these changes as we continue through the summer. And in terms of next steps, we are well underway in terms of doing the performance analysis of the TEP, and we plan on bringing some preliminary results and updates at the upcoming August board meetings. So August 7th is our next board meeting. We plan to review all the input to date. We will also bring forward the proposal that we discussed today in terms of the 1.5%. And then we plan on taking all of this input and really culminating into a revised draft TEP. So the one you have in front of you is the initial draft TEP. This is the actual draft TEP that the authority would then review and receive input on August 14th, and then ultimately consider for approval to circulate for consideration by city, towns, and board of supervisors on August 21st. So we continue down our roadmap, and I just wanted to kind of remind everyone of that, and we're just working towards that next big milestone on August 21st.
All
That
right.
concludes my presentation.
Mr. Chair?
Okay,
You said you're going to come back on August 7th with the final draft of the TEP. Are
Well,
all the
not the 7th, the 14th.
14th, okay, well, that's 3 weeks from tonight. So are all the RTPCs going to be able to meet by that time?
They have been scheduled.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay, have we been doing any polling along the way on anything?
We did that initial poll in April and May.
But what about more recently?
We have not done
With the
anything
change,
recently.
You know, with the change language and so forth?
We are doing a series of telephone town halls and other kinds of meetings, but they're not statistically valid polls.
You what?
We're launching a series of telephone town halls, online surveys, but they are not statistically valid.
Are they close
surveys.
to it?
Hard to know yet at this stage.
It's a good input. Yeah, it's good feedback.
Because it would seem to me we would want to, it would help inform our decisions.
Okay.
Is there a possibility of doing it at this point, or is it too late?
Well, it would require a budget allocation, and we'd have to move very quickly.
All right, I do have a speaker card. Debbie.
Good evening.
Is it on?
Sorry.
You guys are matching.
Sorry, the meeting was too long. It's all right. Try that again. Can you hear me now? So, good evening. Thank you for taking my comment. I am Debbie Toth with Choice in Aging. I just, a couple of things briefly want to comment that the outreach process and the data collection that you're doing in phone town halls and various other methods need to make it out to senior centers, assisted living facilities, independent living for seniors. I think the process needs to be more comprehensive. I think also what we need to have folks understand is that this isn't just, do we want to put more money in paratransit, which is why the word accessible transportation is used. There is a growing aging population, in case you've been sleeping and missed that. And the way that we provide transportation needs to match what the needs are of that population, not fund a federal unfunded mandate that doesn't meet the needs of that population. So there needs to be some incredibly strong policy language in here and not just some money that gets thrown at paratransit. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will entertain a motion.
There was no action there. I was just
Oh,
input.
it's got to hear action.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's
It
information.
did say action.
It does say action.
Which
All
the
right.
motion
With-
would be to
with-
continue with, accept the report and continue. Their question is to continue with producing the TEP.
First, second, call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I think, I want to thank everybody's patience. We're adjourned.